Hey everybody, Peter Zeihan coming to you from the ever-increasingly foggy Dockman Trail. This is the next in our Ask Peter series that was born out of my airline delay. Today, the question is about Joe Manchin, the Democrat from West Virginia, who has managed to insert a couple of clauses into the deal with the White House to extend the debt ceiling. Specifically, it's something that Manchin has been after a while, which is permitting and federal approval to get a new pipeline built through West Virginia to ship natural gas. Environmentalists hate it because it's natural gas. Pro-fossil fuel folks obviously think it's okay. The truth is that everyone's right, everyone's wrong. So let me kind of lay out what it means. Let's start with the green side. For those of you who think that solar and wind is the future of energy, and that any sort of fossil fuel is just anathema to that future, you're clearly very bad at math. Just think of every day in your life. When the sun goes down, solar no longer works. And while you can use batteries a little bit, the United States right now has less than a couple minutes of battery storage. And there is not enough lithium on the planet for the United States to get to 4 hours of battery storage. And we don't have a battery chemistry that would allow us to go not just through the night, but through the winter and through periods where there's usually not a lot of sun, which if you live in the American Northeast is the vast majority of the year. So you need a complementary power source that can work with solar and wind. And the best way to do that is with natural gas. You basically use solar when it's available, and you have a combined cycle natural gas that can plant that can spin up in 10 to 15 minutes whenever it gets cloudy or whenever the sun goes down, every day. For the foreseeable future, until we have a better technology or better solar or probably better wind is what would get there first, this is just where we're going to go. So if you want to build solar and wind without a complementary system, you're then basically forcing anyone who needs emergency power to use a diesel generator. And as we've seen in the case of Germany, they have used lignite coals to back up, and you can't spin that up and down in 10, 15 minutes. You have to leave that on the whole time. So despite $2 trillion in green tech build-out, Germany's carbon emissions have actually gone up. So, there's a problem. Now, for those of you on the fossil fuel side who say that intermittency of solar and wind means that it's not a viable power source and it can only exist with subsidies, you're not very good with math either. Solar and wind in the right geographies are now the cheapest way of generating power on an hour-by-hour basis. Now, hour-by-hour being the key word there. There's something that some folks like to use called the levelized cost of operation, meaning that you average the costs out over the 24-hour day, 365-day a year period. That's really not a great measure because when the sun stops shining and your power goes down to zero, you still need it, and that's not reflected in the levelized cost, or at least not sufficiently, in my opinion, because, when you don't have power and you need power, you will pay whatever you have to do to get power. There are parts of the country that can do more of one or the other. So if you're in the American Northeast, which is neither sunny nor windy, fossil fuels are going to be a much bigger part of your power mix going forward than it can be in the rest of the world. However, if you're in the Southwest, you're in a place that has great sun, and if you're where the Southwest overlaps with the Great Plains, you've got great sun and wind. And that means ultimately we need more and more things like what Manchin is after. Keep in mind, the pipeline he was so much in love with, the way he wants to get this done is not just a one-off approval for a pipeline across a state line. He wants that for all energy infrastructure. And obviously the green zealots think this only means pipes, but it also means power lines. Because if we're going to move to a cleaner, greener future, we have to be able to move electrons from where they can be generated with solar and wind to where we actually live. And since the single largest concentration of population this is one of those situations, and really on all sides. So Scotland has benefited hugely from union in financial terms. Culture, let's put that to the side. That's a political question. No one can decide that except for the Scots themselves. But from a financial point of view, the financial transfers from London to Scotland over the last century have been massive, especially in the last 30 years. And it's going to become more and more important to their survival as a province of the United Kingdom moving forward for simple demographic reasons. Now, for those of you who have traveled extensively in the United Kingdom, this is not going to be a surprise to you. But as you move north from London, the people you see become whiter, poorer, older, fatter, and unhealthier. In fact, if Scotland were to secede and become its own thing, it would be demographically the oldest country in Europe, would have the worst finances, because of healthcare and pension costs, and it would be the least healthy. And that alone means that the European Union will, let me say this very clearly, never let Scotland in ever. And that blows a hole in any of the arguments for Scottish independence in my mind, because they would lose the transfer payments and they would be completely on their own in a country that has to import almost all of their food and increasingly a substantial portion of their energy unless they want to go back to soft coal. The oil money from the North Sea is largely gone. So, maybe it made some sense for Scotland to break away in the 1980s when the oil money was flowing and the population was younger. But now you're left with a country that has very little in the way of manufacturing. Most of the major banks are headquartered in London. Even the Royal Bank of Scotland has not had a great couple of decades. And if we did have secession, the question then, of course, even if you could join the European Union, is whether it would work out. There is talk, of course, in Scotland of what happens with currencies, and the current plan of the secessionists would be to continue to use the British pound until such time as they can make the full adoption of the euro. Now, it's not so much that the Brits can stop someone from using their pound, they just won't make policy with Scotland in mind in that scenario. It also means that this is fully a negotiated divorce, kind of like the Czech Republic and the Slovak Republic seceding, or the theoretical Quebec succeeding, which means they would have to take their proportion of things like the national debt. And if they're doing that in an environment of a fixed currency that they can't control, and they don't have the oil money and there's no manufacturing money, yikes. And we're assuming here that, which means that they're going to be in a financial situation that the EU won't touch anyway. So even if they did get the EU, they wouldn't get into the euro. They wouldn't be able to qualify. And then there's the issue, of course, whether or not the Brits decide to punish them for some of these decisions. It doesn't have to be anything strikingly overt. It could be just what, say, the Brits did when all these protests in Hong Kong started a couple years ago, telling all the people in Hong Kong that if you want to apply for citizenship, we'll push you to the front of the line. About 300,000 people left. 300,000 people leave Scotland, young people. That would be enough to destroy what's left of the economy almost overnight. And between economic likely destitution in the north and whatever's going on in London in the south, if you're under 30 in Scotland and you have an education, there's really no decision to make. You've probably been living in London already. So you lose the diaspora, you lose basically what would be remittances, you lose population, you lose the financial transfers, you lose a stable currency, and all that so you can have fog by yourself. Economically speaking, geopolitically speaking, Scottish independence is a suicide pact. Does that mean it won't happen? Of course not. People do dumb things all the time. I'm going to go down there now.